Welcome, everyone. Today is going to be a little bit of a mix of a talk and conversations at tables. We weren't really sure what kind of setup it was going to look like here, so we've tried to go as flexible as we can with this approach. My name's Brendan. This is my colleague, Darryl.
Hi, everyone.
And today we're going to be talking about some tips and tricks for avoiding crunch and catastrophe in game dev, which is going to look a little bit like this. So first part, we're going to be talking about the inherent sort of complex nature of game development. Then we're going to talk a little bit about agile release planning, and then foundations for great teams in order to make that work. So a little bit about us. As I said, my name's Brendan, this is Darryl. After, I think, last year, we delivered a couple of customized Agile fundamentals courses for a couple of different games companies. Yours was one of them, Roberto. And after that experience, IGEA got in contact with us to partner up to figure out how might we deliver a training experience that is specialized for game producers, as this was identified, according to them, as one of the biggest skills gaps in the industry. Some of the challenges that they talked to us about were that a lot of the Agile-related sort of development courses out there are quite generic, and they don't acknowledge the specifics and complexity of games development. They thought that there's an opportunity to help people that are coming in from adjacent industries that don't work in games development to try to understand the craft a little bit better. A kind of acknowledgement that some of the agile and lean competencies and practices and mindset could be improved in the industry. And all of this kind of underpinned by this DGTO initiative from the government to offer tax incentives to the games industry. And this sort of acknowledgement that if that does what it's supposed to do, the games industry will inevitably grow quite large in this country, and we need to be prepared for that. And producers being a skills gap, how do we solve that problem? So since December of last year, we've been working on a course together that's running at the end of this month. And this workshop is a little taster, and we've sort of cherry-picked a few things from that course.
And only the best things, of course.
Yeah,
naturally.
Of course. Yes, very much so. We thought we'd share what we've learned, a few things that we've learned along this journey, because we've done it in conjunction with IGEA and worked with some pretty senior games producers, and we're trying to take the nuggets of wisdom that we've learned from them, combined with some of our experience in the industry, to share that with you. So a little bit about me. My background is a bit split between agile coaching, but also product management. My main claim to fame is if you've ever used Spotify for Windows or Mac. That was my baby for a number of years on desktop. And while I was at Spotify, I was a huge advocate for doing more in the game space. I kind of kicked off the partnership with Discord and Spotify, which was a lot of fun. I'm quite monogamous in my game playing. I pretty much clock up all my hours in Dota 2. Please don't judge me. Massive nerd, been playing games since I was about 6. And also worked quite heavily on the partnership between Microsoft and Spotify to get Spotify on Xbox. And I also have a weird patent for integrating music into live game streams. And this is Darryl.
Hi. I'm a bit of a strange duck as well. I've got a bit of a technical and business background. So I've been running businesses and training and teaching pretty much my whole adult life. But I also started out my career as a database developer, so a bit of a mix there. I also initially trained to be a scientist, so both technical and business side there. The really big theme across all of my background, I guess, is that I discovered that I was on a journey to help organisations be more successful, but at the same time also more humane places to work. And that's really what brings me joy. I'm now a passionate champion of being part of changing the way the world works. That's what gets me out of bed with a smile on my dial in the morning. Whereas Brendan is quite monogamous, I am more of a games slut. I don't judge me any more than you judge him. MMORPGs are my genre of choice. I've played pretty much every single one that's out there fairly extensively. I don't think there's one out there I haven't played quite a bit of. I've also been gaming my whole life pretty much, and I've written a few simple games myself. I started on a VIC-20 with a tape drive, and I wrote a text-based adventure game where once you got to the next stage in the game, it had to go away and load the next section off tape, so you could never go back once you progressed past that point. So, yeah, I still spend several nights a week online gaming with a bunch of mates who have been playing together for 25 years. I also financially contribute to an agile game studio that I love the way they work. They really use a iterative, incremental, transparent, agile form of development. And so you can see that one down in the bottom right corner there. It's been going for many years. It's hoping to launch in another year or two. So, yeah, check that out if you're interested. All right, I think that's it for me.
Just realised it is stupidly bright in here.
Oh, yeah. Do the light thing.
That's better.
Mood lighting.
There we go.
Hey.
All right, so let the not having to listen to us all the time part of this begin.
Excellent.
Turn to the people on your table and answer this question from your perspective, based on your experiences or what you know from the industry. What causes game releases to fail? So we'll just spend 5 minutes chatting in your groups.
Yep.
Yeah.
Off you go. Oh, yeah.
Whatever that means to you. Yeah.
Yeah, what have you seen? Biggest impacts, worst failures? Off you go.
That's all right.
So we're just going to pick a couple and ask them what they
Go around with this.
do you want to?
I can do it.
Whichever you want.
Good idea.
Just join the table. Maybe this one.
Stop on that. Hey team.
Sounds good.
It's very direct and clear, but also behind it is conceptual, not like just an art. That's good. It's really good.
So maybe just one more minute. That was loud.
So probably let me know if I go past like 9:23.
Okay.
Alrighty. Any tables would like to share kind of a common theme or themes that came up? Alrighty, here we go.
Right off the bat.
I was just going to say that we spoke about how the increasing amount of games these days that are live ops and how there's not really one release and you don't really have a concept of a binary succeed or fail for that first release. It's a soft launch. You need to get it out to players. You need to keep doing updates.
And what do you think about that causes them to fail?
It's weird because I guess my definition of fail doesn't really apply in this context because if we mean like financial failure, again, if it's a live ops game, you're probably hopefully you're building into the schedule time to get feedback and adjust and find the market fit at some point after release. But also that fail, in my mind, is actually a good thing in terms of you want to fail as often and as early as possible, that by the time you get to release, you've hopefully failed dozens of times, learnt from those, and guaranteed as much as possible that your release itself is going to be as strong as possible.
Fantastic. I love that mindset. That's awesome. Hope I can teach you something today. What did you folks talk about?
But I guess maybe I'll just cover one so that if anyone covered the same thing, they could mention it instead. I think something really interesting that Narissa brought up is a game failing because you haven't playtested it to check whether or not it's fun at like all the stages. You kind of mentioned Daisy mentioned the stages as well. And that you're so hell-bent on getting it finished that you don't focus on whether or not it's fun or good. I guess is the we had a few others, but that was like the main.
Great, thank you so much. That makes a lot of sense. I'm assuming you might be working with like a release date in that case, and so you're pushing hard to get it done, and maybe you haven't had the chance to stop and go, wait, is this actually fun? Yeah, awesome. Cool.
ours, we covered a lot, but one of the kind of over-branching ones was just managing expectations across every stage. So things like managing client expectations to then the team's expectations, and then once you release, also the audience's expectations, because you might release the game but then it might be a failure to your community because you haven't marketed it the right way or had a proper relationship with the audience to know what they want.
Great, thank you so much. Sorry I didn't make it to everyone else, but we're trying to run a tight ship. No, that's all right. Okay, so put this down. Arguably, most of your answers kind of fit into one of these categories or multiple of these categories. So I heard a lot of talk there about uncertainty. How much do you know that that game is fun, for example? Complexity, I don't think we covered a little bit of complexity when we talked about live ops, for example. I suppose some of the talk around managing expectations could be quite volatile if those expectations are changing regularly. So, yeah, I would say that, what makes games potentially fail likely falls into one or multiple of these categories. And we like to call it VUCA, and it's a term that actually came about from the military, which is not a great place to start. But, I think this is going to ground us in a lot of what we're about to cover. And, making a game should be easy, right? You just need to make a game that's feasible, like, can we reliably build this and maintain it to an acceptable level of quality? It should be fairly straightforward, how hard could it be to make it fun for the person playing the game and worth whatever they paid for it? But also, they need to be able to understand how it works and actually be usable. But of course, we need to make money for the company, right? So it's got to be viable as well. And I mean, this is pretty straightforward, no?
Just do all of those things.
Yeah, just do all of them all at once.
And nothing else.
Yeah. Has anyone felt these things compete with one another as you're working on games? No doubt. To me, this is what makes any software project complex, is that we're trying to balance these things all the time. And we can focus heavily on one of them, quite often to the exclusion of others. But for some reason, in this industry as well, we also then have to take these fluid, complex factors and then apply kind of a rigid, fixed release date, tight budget scenario to creating a game. We have maybe publisher expectations that we need to launch on a certain date, or we've announced it to the public and there's an expectation from them that we're going to launch on a certain date. We're working to a certain budget or cost. And whilst battling these constraints, often it's quality that tends to go out the window, unfortunately.
Does anyone recognise that?
So what ends up happening is, in order to reduce risk of messing up one of these constraints, we try to predict and manage them. We try to manage risk by coming up with a really super detailed plan and trying to adhere to that plan. Does this sort of thing look familiar to anyone? Has anyone seen stuff like this before? This terrifies me.
I can see a couple of people pulling their hair out.
I'm sorry if I've unleashed any trauma in anyone in the room. So, as we've been exploring, game development is complex, and there's this concept. Has anyone heard of Cynefin theory in the room? No? Oh, wow, cool. I get to teach something new. Yes. So Cynefin theory is basically this theory that all problems broadly fit into one of four categories, and each category is very different based on the nature of the problem. So an obvious problem is like, fold post a letter. Everyone sort of almost instinctively knows how to do that. You lick the letter and put the thing in and then post it, right?
Do people still do that?
I know. Complicated problems are ones that we usually can solve with project management. They're ones where if we do enough analysis up front, we're able to produce something. Basic manufacturing is an example of this. We take experts that know how to build something, put them together, and we build it. And usually it should go according to plan. And there, the Cynefin says that the answer to complicated problems is to do some analysis up front, and then you can solve the problem. But then we got this fun thing called complex problems, and they are ones where cause and effect are not clear up front. They are only clear in hindsight. So there, with complex problems, Cynefin sort of talks about how we need to try something first and learn from that and try again, much like the first table was talking about how we're trying to fail early and often. And that's sort of the best approach to solving a complex problem, or what we would call an emergent approach to solving problems. Because we can't predict the chaos that awaits us once we start creating a new game. Our best approach is to learn from doing and use our learnings to adapt our approach rather than trying to analyse and predict what will happen. Then we've got this last thing called chaos, and that is basically cause and effect, and there's no relationship at all. And that's often where, that's sort of like emergency management, where you just have to act. There's no time to even think.
So February 2020, for example.
yeah. Totally. So the goal of this little workshop here today, and ultimately the course at the end that we're running at the end of the month, is to give you some tools to adapt to complexity and to what we talked about before, VUCA, and improve your chances of hitting your goals rather than trying to predict uncertainty, which inevitably tends to lead to failure. And so one such way to address complexity and create an emergent approach to development is to change how we look at planning in general, that picture that I showed before. Segue to Darryl.
Oh, just before we move on, maybe just, did that make sense to people about the Cynefin stuff? I'm seeing a few nods. Yeah. Yeah. Question? You have to yell out.
Oh, so I'm hearing you say Cynefin. How's that spelled?
It's Cynefin. It's Gaelic pronunciation, so Cynefin, but it's with an F. Cynefin. We should put that on the slide, shouldn't we?
We should.
We should. Dave Snowden, for those of you that have heard of him, it's his thinking model about how to approach a problem, working out which problem space or domain, he calls them, it's in, tells you which treatment to apply. Really, really great model for all sorts of things.
I suppose it helps us ensure that we don't solve, if you've ever heard that expression.
Or try to solve.
Yeah, try to solve a problem with the same hammer, right? Hammer and nail to every single type of problem.
Yeah. If you try and apply a hammer to a job that needs a screwdriver, it's not going to go well, even though a hammer is a good tool, but you're just applying it in the wrong space. That's what this is talking about. So as Brendan said, the top right, the complicated domain, building a house, that might go in that. There's a lot of complicated steps, but it's pretty well known. You can tell what the cause and effect is going to be. So applying a really planned approach in that quadrant is a really good idea. It's not necessarily best practice. Like best practice might be like double entry bookkeeping. It's just you put a number there, you put the other one there, and that's the best practice, right? But complex, where things are really, butterfly flaps its wings on one side and, you might get a storm on the other side. You can't tell the cause and effect. That's chaos, and complex domains are much harder to predict what's happening. And so if we try and use those predictive models on this side, it's not going to go well. It's going to be unsuccessful. Did that help? Yeah? Awesome. Thanks. I'm just going to keep using this because it's easier. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about planning now, because as Brendan just explained, we talked about in that Cynefin model, if we're trying to use a rigid, predictive planning type of model in that is successful, can be a good idea, it can be good practice in that complicated domain. If we try and use that in the complex domain, that is going to lead to problems, because when things change rapidly, we struggle to keep up, and so we're going to get ourselves into problems. So the main thing to remember as well about this is that making a game, it's not just the, end state and the path to get there is unknown at the start. It's that it's actually unknowable. We actually can't know what it is fully ahead of time. We might have an idea for where it's going to go, but in terms of the right path to get to what's going to be the most fun for the most people, we're not necessarily always going to know that in great detail beforehand. We actually can't. So how do we do this in a more adaptive way? It doesn't mean that planning is completely useless at all. It just means we have to do it in a different way. So that's what we're going to talk about. In fact, release planning can be one of the most critical tools for a game, and done well, it can actually lead to launching successful games, maintaining large player bases, and can be one of the best tools in your pocket. So let's talk about that. But before we do, just a check-in, I suppose. Is anyone thinking agile plus planning? I thought if we're working agile, we don't have to plan anymore. Who's heard that? Who's heard people say that? I've heard people say it a lot. Yep, a few hands up, a few wry smiles. So a lot of people misunderstand how agile approaches planning. Because in a traditional way we do almost all of the planning up front, right before we do any of the work, and then we do very little planning later on. What Agile says is we still have to plan. To not plan is to be irresponsible. What we don't do is do all that planning up front and then try and make the world stick to our plan even when things change further on down the track. What it says is we're going to smooth that planning effort out across the entire course of the project. So we're actually going to do a bit of planning at the start so that we know where we're going roughly, but then it's going to be planning all the way along, continuously planning, always planning. In fact, most people, if they're doing this well, if they're doing Agile well, tend to find that they actually end up doing more planning than traditional teams would. It's just that they're spreading it out and doing it continuously along the way. Again, perhaps an unfortunate military analogy, but no plan survives contact with the enemy. So as soon as you start, the plan itself might become useless, but the planning and continuous planning work and process is actually priceless. Okay, so that's essentially what we're going to talk about today. So it's actually not an oxymoron at all. All right, so generally the guidelines for talks at GCAP are that they're not beginner level talks, they're intermediate to advanced level talks. So I'm not going to go through in detail what a release plan is and how to do it. Okay, if anyone is interested in getting that information, come along to the course we're doing at the end of the month. We do go into it in a lot more detail. So the approach I'm going to take here is to talk to you about some patterns and anti-patterns. So patterns and anti-patterns is a way of thinking about things that we can observe, that we can harness to give us the results that we want or avoid the results we don't want. So if anyone's not heard that term before, an anti-pattern is a pattern that leads to an undesirable outcome, some sort of result that we don't want. Whereas a pattern is something that's going to give us a better outcome. An easy way to think about it is tailwinds and headwinds. If you're in a plane, a headwind makes it harder to get where you want to go. If that's a difficult job, it makes it even more difficult. It takes longer, you've got to expend more fuel, whatever it might be. Whereas a tailwind actually makes it easier to get where you want to go. It helps you. So a pattern in this context is like a tailwind. It'll make it easier. An anti-pattern is something that's going to make it harder. And it's already hard, it's going to make it almost impossible. So that's the idea that we're going with. All right, so I've got 3 patterns and anti-patterns for you today. So here's the first one. So Clinton Keith literally wrote the book on agile game development. If any of you haven't read it, I recommend it. It's a good book. And as you can see, he frequently comes across a situation where people who are creating a game don't really know how what they do is going to contribute to the overall game. Just imagine for a moment what that would be like, and I'm sure this has never happened to any of you, but maybe you have a friend that this has happened to, right, where you come into work not actually knowing if what you do is going to matter. You don't know how it fits in, you don't know how it contributes. So how do you know what you do matters or not? How demoralising would that feel? So how hard would it be to really care about the game you're making and to be really invested in making sure it's a quality game? All right, so what would a pattern look like that would get more desirable results and be like a tailwind here? A shared vision of the future of what that game is going to look like. Have everybody create it together, so it's a shared vision, so people feel engagement and ownership over it. That's going to mean that people make better micro decisions on a daily basis, and those things are the things that determine the quality of the game. So what could you do to have that vision to be communicated and articulated? Imagine if you wrote, like if you mocked up the Steam page or even like a Blu-ray box for some games that still ship like that, right? You could have some, mock-up art on it. You could have your bullet points on it of what the game's going to do. Imagine having things like, if you were making a skateboard game, you could have things on it like, execute amazing tricks, jumping your skateboard over large objects. Skateboard on places you're not allowed to go in real life, like the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Get together with your mates and invent contests, that sort of stuff. So by having some sort of way to show the vision of what that game is going to look like that you can share across people would help everyone be on the same page. All right, quick show of hands. Whoops. Quick show of hands. Who's ever been in a situation where you've worked on a game and you didn't really, either there wasn't a vision or you didn't have clear access to the vision, couldn't find it when you needed it, etc. Who's been in that situation? Wow. Yeah. And what was the impact? Like, what did you relate to this kind of thing? Yep, seeing nods. Yep. Anyone got a particular example? Yeah. Yell out for us.
Yeah, working on a particular team quite a few years ago, and the upper management very much held the cards over everyone,
Right.
and very much eroded team self-worth.
Yep.
Didn't know when release dates were, just had kind of arbitrary deadlines for investors and such, and created a lot of despondence, a lot of hopelessness within the office.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Pretty amazing, huh? So this is one of the things that we see as being super important, not just a nice to have. It's not optional. It's actually vital to bring people together so that they're on the same page.
Has anyone done the opposite? Has anyone participated or run a vision workshop around a game before? Has anyone been a part of that? Can I ask, how was that?
No, it's really useful because it achieves the objective of that being shared and that people will be included into that. But even doing that, what has been challenging is to keep the vision shared as it changes during the life cycle of because the vision. You might have some pillars for the game, some sort of stuff on that vision, whether it's on the game design document or whatnot, but that also changes along the life cycle of the game. It can be a pivotal change or not, and therefore what it's also interesting is how you keep that shared ownership and that vision accessible all the time while it happens.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic.
One thing I found that can help with these sorts of artifacts is when you create them to book in check-in dates and times in the calendar in the future to come back to it and go, does this still make sense? Is this still relevant? Because it can surface a lot of interesting conversations around, well, actually, this has changed and this has changed, but are we sure that's changed? Or did they ask us to do this? Or, it kind of creates that shared understanding again. And actually, shared understanding is something we're going to talk about a little bit later as well. So, awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of the really big key takeaways from the vision. It's not a one and done, park it, shelve it, and forget about it. It needs to be, you need to check in on it, need to keep it up to date, it should be a living thing, communicate it to new people that join, regularly, touch base against it and see if it needs to be updated and then reshare again, etc. By the way, I did say we've got 3 of these patterns and anti-patterns for you. So as we're going along, check in how many of the 3 you really have experienced or have impacted you. Let's play a bit of a game of bingo, if you like. See if you get all 3. I might even be able to rustle up a prize if you get all 3. All right? It's not a real prize, it's just a tongue-in-cheek prize. But anyway. All right, so that's our first one. Any other thoughts or questions or anything about that one, observations about it? Yeah?
I guess, how do you make sure that the vision for the project isn't too high level and still relevant to the departments to know how that is meant to really direct what they need to do?
Yeah, really good question. So in case you didn't hear it, it's how do you keep it relevant and for different people at different levels? Is that the question? Yeah. So you can have a number of aspects to your vision statement. You can have a really high level one. It might just have things about like genre, setting, core gameplay loop, a few things like that. And that could be also one that might go to kind of more senior management or externally. For marketing or to get, investment or something like that. But then you could have a more detailed one, which is more internal, and you could have, right down to, key features and, all sorts of things. So you can have that version as an internal version. So that's one thing that I know some studios do. And I guess then the other thing is as well just... kind of gauging your audience, like thinking about who, which stakeholders at what level, what do they really want to see, what are they interested in. Tailoring it to them.
Can I ask a question back to you? In the example that you gave, is that relatable because you're in a team that's one of many teams that's working on the same game? Would that be an example?
No, we're just one team, but we're kind of going through an agile uplift and stuff, and so I'm kind of smaller in the studio, and so I think some of the broader concepts about alignment weeks and other things is just harder to relate back sometimes.
Yep. I find, and I think we'll cover this again later on as well, but the concept of cascading a higher level vision or mission down to a team level, and then baking whatever that is into your ceremonies. So whether it's sprint planning or whether it's even review, to remind yourselves and whoever else is involved, whether it's stakeholders, this is why we're here at your team level, and maybe even cascading that up because we're here for this reason and that's why it's relevant to the bigger, broader picture that we're talking about. When I've worked as a product manager, often I would like to start my sprint plannings with just a reminder, here's why we're here. And then that's the context in which all your sprint planning conversations flow through. And so communicating it again and again, even though it can sound kind of annoying or repetitive, has that benefit of one day you kind of might wake up and go, wait a second, is that still true anymore? Like maybe something's changed and maybe we need to address that. Whereas if it's an artifact that gets kind of swept under the rug, it's on a Confluence page somewhere that no one looks at, it just becomes irrelevant. So I can really recommend just repetition and bake it into the ceremonies, whatever ceremony makes most sense.
Yeah, 100%. Just to build on that, I was going to say a very similar thing. Bake it into all your ceremonies. So sprint planning, check in on it. But when you do your showcase, well, this is one of the coolest features in the game that we've just implemented. Or even when you do your release, if you're doing multiple releases, or even if you just get the game into a releasable state, every few sprints or whatever it might be, and then go, okay, check in against core gameplay loop, coolest features, whatever. Which of those can we tick off? That can be a cool way of keeping it alive, keeping it real for people.
I think Roberto had his hand up.
Go. An experience and advice, those workshops, vision workshops that I work with in really large studios, what has been happening is an answer to the first anti-pattern bullet point there, that they say that the team doesn't know what the part will fit into the whole. So that exercise of cascading, the way it can work is you have that high level vision, whether it's a game design document or whatever artifact you've got, then you give that to the teams and also to have them to understand, okay, how are we going to contribute to this vision? And then you can call it, even if you want, a sub-vision for each of the teams that are participating there, for them to have a vision statement on how they are going to contribute. If it's from a technical perspective, maybe they will be dreaming of doing it so that it's the most high-performing in whatever number of servers and so on and so forth. Or others want to innovate in a cool engine feature, or if it is from a marketing perspective, they want to disrupt some different medium, something like that. And also that's very useful to align all those to make sure that everybody's working to the same genetic.
Yeah, perfect. All right, cool. Thanks, everyone. By the way, interactive is what we're hoping for here, so excuse me, just keep it up. That's great. All right, so that's our first one. All right, let's move on to our second one now. So as you can see here, Morgan, who's one of the most senior executive producers in Australia, he calls out this one with a mind-boggling 90% of problems in games. So that's a massive statement there. That's a staggering impact. And this is coming from someone who's been producing commercially successful games for over 20 years and has never crunched once in all that time. And so, from what he's saying, making those tough calls, those hard decisions, is one of the most important things that you can do as a producer to set your organisation and your teams up for success. So, instead, the pattern is face into the trade-off decisions. So there are always going to be trade-off decisions that need to be made. And sometimes those trade-off decisions include one of the fundamental foundations that Agile is based on is being empirical. It's being realistic about the times that things take. And so if you're going to work backwards from, if you're doing a traditional release, or even as we were talking before, a live ops, if you're going into early access or something, and you want to think about how long you want to spend in early access before you launch, whatever method you're using, being able to work backwards and say, this is how much time we're going to need, and then that means that we need to make a trade-off decision. So we prioritise our features, the core gameplay loop, whatever it is, to make sure we've got the scope that's going to be needed to make a successful game. But at the same time, we want to be able to have enough time to go through those various phases. So that's a trade-off that we're going to need to make. How much time have we got? How much scope, can we, or do we need to vary in order to do that? So this is, again, being adaptive in our planning. We don't just start with our plan and say that's what we're going to stick with. We need to be able to adjust it as we go along. So as you can see, we've got a burn up here that we can use we're aiming for that blue line. That's the scope that we ideally are looking for, and based on our current rate of completion, we can make various projections as to where we're going to end up. And if we know, because of some marketing campaign or external funding type of commitment, whatever it might be, that we've got to go live on a certain date, then we can think about, okay, this is the scope we could have by that date. It might be less. Or we could go for, if we want the full scope, it's going to take longer. And then we've got a trade-off decision to make. And when we've got data to back it up, we can go to our various stakeholders and we can talk about, this is the decision point, this is the trade-off that we have. Let's have a little chat on your table again. So about 5 minutes. What sort of hard decisions or trade-offs might you need to make if you're working on a game? What have you come across? How did you make them? How did it go? Were you supported to make the trade-off decision that you wanted to make or needed to make, even as a team, or even if you weren't the producer that your producer wanted to make? Were you supported to make the right decision? If not, how did that go? That kind of conversation. So about 5 minutes on your table. Off you go.
I spoke to someone recently and said, it's been very good. His biggest number of stuff.
Oh yeah, no, we're pretty good for time, aren't we? Yeah.
I'm thinking now, if we've got time, like how they estimate that kind of thing.
Right.
I've got to run. I'm Dave and I'm doing the reports. I'm from Toast and Direct. Yeah. I just looked at my email. You sent an email to me. I didn't respond to you. I've been so busy. So we're doing the plenty stuff in a couple weeks. I've got to run. Really interesting. Everything we're talking about, we're going through as one big deal until the 2025. One from GCAP, which is amazing. I came in 2 years into the project, and I've been there for just like a year. So, always changes. So to keep the same, it's just getting behind and looking forward to it. I've got enough. Really good job.
That's 5. Do you want to go around and ask people? Yeah, cool.
Alrighty. So we might rock around the tables again. Hear some of your stories. Who wants to? Someone over this side of the room. Who wants to share what you talked about? Yeah.
Thanks. I don't know how valuable this is, but I just wanted to admit that I'm super awful at. I will avoid the tough calls at all times. Anytime scope ever has to be cut, it's like a personal problem, and I'm like, take it really personally. Like, oh, I should have, worked harder so that we didn't have to make a cut, so that we could, feasibly finish something ever. Instead, I'm like, no, it's my fault that we didn't, work at 1,000,000 miles an hour at all times, which is just because I like to scope creep. Oops. Yeah.
Thank you so much. No, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing, and love the transparency.
Welcome to Scope Creep Anonymous.
Yeah, that's right. I was going to say, don't we all? Someone from this table, maybe? You got lots of people. Did you? Yeah.
We jumped around a lot, of course, but it was a point we came across was it ties into the first anti-pattern you touched on initially, where if you've got the entire team is invested in understanding the entire project and kind of bought into it, it kind of front loads a bit of those decisions and that ability to cut features later on. If everyone has it in the back of their mind, they know where those lines may have to be drawn. It may be accepting cases of drastic pivots later on down the line where you've had to do a drastic change. And then after that, it's just separating your ego from what you've worked on and hopefully being at one with the idea that what you've worked on may no longer be valuable in the right context.
So we're doing this weird thing of like prototyping and designing in production, and I think the way that we've sort of dealt with having to constantly reassess the scope and pivots and things along the way is whenever we get to sprint planning, we have a tier list of features. So you've got the least cuttable to the most cuttable, and it's always a sliding scale. And everyone understands that, and everyone's on board. So like, okay, we've got to get this stuff up the top done, and that stuff down the bottom. And that seems to help everyone, deal with, okay, the deadline only moves if it really has to, if something's broken. And that's sort of the general rule. And that seems to be working for the most part.
Did you say tier list?
Tier list.
That's exactly what I was imagining. That's amazing. I love it.
I love it. Transparency, prioritization, clarity, like that's all just fantastic stuff. That's gold. And it works, right? Fantastic. Love it. Maybe one more. Anyone? Yeah.
When teams, I'm coming from an art team perspective specifically, but I think this applies to any team. When the objective skill level of a team doesn't align with the budget, and you need to bring everyone's, can you please do worse, so we can get this out on time?
Because nobody wants to gold plate anything.
It's just like, unfortunately, better done than perfect. Because no one can work with 50% of perfect, but we can all unblock each other with something that's 100% done, and we can polish later if there's miraculously budget found in the couch sofas.
That's fantastic, thank you. So we sometimes say progress over perfection in Agile, right? So we don't want to hold up until it's perfect, because otherwise we'll just hold up. Did you want to add?
Yeah, wasn't going to be a topic, but I suspect it might be one. Many folks here done this kind of thing, burn up, where you're tracking kind of work towards some definition of scope completion of some sort. I'm curious, how many of you, when you're trying to figure this out, is this hours or days? Does anyone do time estimates when doing this? Raise your hand if you do. Okay. Points? Interesting. Anyone work with like number of stories or t-shirt sizes or anything else that's a bit wacky? Yep, a couple, okay. One sort of slight bugbear of mine is when we work with time, and I see this a lot, time is almost inherently kind of based around this thing we were talking about in the beginning around prediction, and we're trying to predict how long things will take. Let me ask you, for those that had your hand up around time, are they precise estimates usually? Less, yeah. The issue I have with time, using time in this approach, is it really is trying to predict the future in terms of how long things will take, rather than use an expression we sometimes use called yesterday's weather. How long did things naturally take before? And we can leverage that to predict how long things will take based on what we've done so far. So just a little like heed of warning of using time. I suppose you could use time retroactively to say, well, these sorts of features on average have taken this amount of time, therefore they will in the future. But often when we estimate based on time, it's usually it's usually an individualistic perspective. Like, it will take me this amount of time to do this task. What we're often not estimating is communication that happens in a team, scoping conversations, blockers to getting there. There's so much around the actual work itself that we don't often factor into time, that makes time a tricky rubric to use when doing this, because ideally what we want to do is take our brains away from the nitty-gritty detail of how long something will take and take a step back and go, well, shoot from the hip is actually going to be a bit more accurate, ironically. Yeah, I could talk about estimation all day.
We love it, and if you give us a chance, we'll just segue into this talk being an Agile masterclass. So it's not what you came here for. But absolutely, we love to say it's better to be approximately right than precisely wrong. So, you know. By the way, the other thing is, just while we're talking burn-ups, I love that the scope line on top shows you when the scope changes. Right, so if you have to add new features in or de-scope something, that line moves to show you that. That can be really cool as well.
Another silly catchphrase you can use is specifically vague. I quite like that one too.
All right, let's move on. So we've had 2 anti-patterns. Who's at 2 out of 2 so far? Okay, good. So now let's see how you go with the third one. When all else fails, crunch! So, obviously the title of the talk here. Here's Josh from Playside talking about crunch, and he doesn't really mince his words, does he? So, hands up if you've ever been in a crunch situation. Yikes. Yeah. Anyone got any particularly egregious examples that anyone would like to share with us? Yeah, go.
I worked on the Dota 2 cinematic team, and it was 24/7 on call. I'm in Australia, they're in Seattle, and we had 3 different concurrent cinematics that were running at the same time that I've actually worked that some days that were 24 hours. Yeah, made me want to quit entirely.
I think that's really interesting, right? Made me want to quit entirely. We'll come back to that in a sec. Anyone else? One more, maybe? One more example of a particularly nasty crunch? Anyone want to share with us? No, can't top that. Fair enough. Yeah, it's not a competition. No, wait, it kind of is. No. All right. So, we hear from quite a few people that crunch is fairly prevalent in the industry. Unfortunately, what that means is that the average longevity of a games developer now is that on average, they leave before their 10th anniversary. And I think that's really sad. Most people end up being in a situation where they have to choose between their passion for making games and having a life. And putting people in that situation it's not sustainable, it's not reasonable, it's not fair. We don't want to do it. So many people who make games really would like to return to the days when making games was fun and it was more like a passionate hobby than a job, and it was a privilege to work with gamers. So what do we do about it? Well, Josh has kind of given us a clue in his quote right there. And it fits pretty nicely with the topic for GCAP this year, empower. So if we have empowered and autonomous teams who are brought together with a shared vision so that they're all in alignment, we have a producer that's willing to make the tough calls to set them up for success, then make those hard trade-off decisions, then we end up with a team that's more engaged and more successful, and they have more fun doing it as well. Ultimately, what we're after is to have both, a more successful and more humane way to work. So, ultimately, why do we play games? Why do we make games? Games are supposed to be fun. So, if playing them is for fun, making them should be too. So how soon can people find the fun? When someone's playing your game, how long does it take them to find the fun? When we're making games, how soon can we find the fun? Whoops, sorry, whoops. I'm going to go back. Here we go. So, question for you guys. Little chat just momentarily. What do you do to find the fun, either in the games you play or the work you do? Just a couple of minutes, have a bit of a chat at your table. Off you go. Just thought I'd chuck that in because we've got a bit extra time.
Happy to fluff that out a bit as well.
Yep.
You know what would be really good to do, that I'm sharing with me? It's the Rat King exercise.
Yeah.
Because they could totally do that with a number of groups. They all lock hands and
Yep.
it drives home this one really well.
Yep. Alrighty. Just finishing up. Anyone come up with one that they would like to share? Yeah.
A common theme at our table was celebrating small successes, like getting something to work that might have, as you said, like you thought it was going to be a short problem and ended up taking a long time, but once you finally get it, you just feel amazing. So.
Fantastic. Anyone else?
Our table just talked about like prioritising free time at the end of the day and sort of gamifying the week. If you can see there's a crunch impending next week, to go, okay, this is our priorities this week, and try and get people across the line by incorporating fun into the tasks.
Love that one. Gamifying it and getting stuff done this week if you know stuff's coming next week. And inherent in gamifying it is play games too, right?
Does anyone here work in a team where you have dedicated Slack time or days? Slack time or days, so like one of the days in your sprint or a month or whatever, like sometimes you call them hack days or Slack time or anything like that. You've written about it. Oh.
A few hands up. Okay, that's good.
Yeah, I find incorporating Slack into a team can lead to absolutely amazing things happening. It can lead to people testing out new ideas, which can make games fun. It can lead to people automating and cleaning up the work that they do such that they're able to move faster. One sort of tirade I've been on lately with some of my clients is to say, show me one developer, show me one person that if you gave them a day every couple of weeks, that they would just sit on their hands and do nothing. Like, find me one. Yeah, I think we've got to...
We have play school.
Amazing. What happens at play school?
Everybody gets to choose something that they'd like to work on. It doesn't have to be just a skill they'd like to learn.
I love it.
Beautiful. Everyone gets to choose what whatever they want to work on. How often does that happen?
Every 3 months.
Every 3 months. Oh, cool.
Nice.
Nice.
Wonderful. Thanks. All right, so this one is our third anti-pattern and pattern. A couple of examples for you of some quotes from some industry leaders about doing this. So, several teams and projects that weren't predictably hitting dates made Agile Scrum a baseline expectation of how we work, which brings in a lot of these principles about being empowered and autonomous teams and so on. Now, every team, every project is hitting every date. Team engagement and health score hit 79%, which is pretty high. So it's a big change. Another one, the story of Ava's Manor, took it over, was really behind, people were burnt out. Teaching the team Kanban and doing incremental changes turned into the best run project ever in terms of their experience of it. And the last one, small autonomous groups of cross-disciplinary people can achieve amazing things. Recently took a multi-million-dollar project that was being cancelled to a successful launch and 1-year extension by doing all of these things and giving the team the reins. So, that's our third anti-pattern and pattern. We already found out that most of the room had experienced this anti-pattern. So who's at 3 out of 3 now? Yeah, good job. You definitely should win a prize. I have something for you. All right, so the last little bit, have a little chat amongst your table group. How many of these patterns and anti-patterns have you seen or been impacted by? Which one of them resonated the most deeply with you out of the 3? And what's something that you could take away that you could apply to how you plan or develop games, if that's what you do, or even just the way you play them? Like, what's something that you could really put into practice? All right, so a few minutes, talk amongst your table now.
That's similar to like this feature now on these newer iPhones that is the always on display. Yeah, I don't tend to if that makes sense, because it has to impact the battery life. Not a lot, but they've designed it very specifically for that purpose. But yeah, for something like this, it would be good because it's not active. It's not doing it's almost like a screenshot. And then when you do that, like a screenshot or something.
About another minute. Alrighty, so just finishing up. Okay, so would anyone like to share something that they've decided to take on or that they could see they could implement that would be beneficial? Yeah.
I think there was a few good things that popped up, like playtesting and anyway, the one thing that I thought I could take away that was very easy to do and very high value was something that we touched on right at the start around aligning on vision regularly, just like put up at the start of stand-ups, and even if it's repetitive and annoying, like people will think about it in that moment and reconsider, like, does this thing that we're building align with the game vision, and do we still care about it? It just seems like high value and low effort.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Maybe one more. Maybe someone over the other side of the room. Who would like to? Yeah.
So I think we all in some way related to the making the hard decisions at the right times. Some people had some good experiences, and personally I admitted that where I work we're notoriously pretty bad with it, and that leads to either deadlines being pushed or things not being done on time, and then clarity being lost and snowballing into something. So I think, yeah, trying to push for, even though it's maybe a very cool feature and very close and dear, sometimes it's got to go, or potentially, we also talked about earlier with compromise, maybe it doesn't need to be cut completely, but maybe there's a better way of doing things instead of just the hard decisions either side.
Great. Thanks very much, everyone. All right. So, Natalie, our lovely support volunteer. Everyone say thank you, Natalie. Natalie is going to, Jens, just put your hand over your ears, please. We're not supposed to hand out stickers, so these are a little bit clandestine. But if you could just pass those out to our lovely participants, please. Especially make sure you grab at least one if you're a 3 out of 3. But realistically, just grab the one you want if you would like. All right, I'm going to hand over to my wonderful colleague Brenda now to talk to us about high-performing teams. Do you want this or that?
Have this for now. Thanks, Darryl. Okay, so we've talked about some tips and tricks around adaptive planning in order to effectively manage risk and handle that lovely concept of VUCA that we were talking about before. But none of this will work unless our teams are effectively able to raise problems as they arise and be honest and realistic with the challenges that they face. Otherwise, the common behaviour, as I think someone mentioned before as well, is to ignore the elephants in the room and crunch harder towards sometimes an impossible milestone or deadline. So how do we create an environment where people are going to be honest about where they are and the team, where they are and where the team is at? We need psychological safety. I also love this quote: "Agile won't solve your problems, but it will reveal them." That example Darryl was talking about before, where these experienced producers have helped to turn teams around and get a project from adjunct failure towards something successful. Often it's not the process itself, but it's what it enables you to do. So I mentioned psychological safety. Don't just take our word for it. Google came to this same conclusion after about 4 years of research. This thing called Project Aristotle started in 2012, and it ran over several years to discover the right ingredients for the perfect team. Google is highly team-orientated. They are made up of lots and lots and lots of teams. They're a very big company. And here's what their research tells us about great teams. First and foremost, impact of the work that we do. Do we fundamentally believe that the work we're doing matters? We kind of touched on that before when we talked about people connecting to the vision of the team. And then secondly, meaning of work. So are we working on something that is personally important for each of us? Does it matter on an individual and personal level? Structure and clarity. Are goals, roles, and execution plans on our team clear? Has anyone run into this problem where they're not sure what people's roles are, what they're supposed to be doing, they're not sure why their team exists, what they're supposed to be working on? Do you folks work with a bit of that kind of chaos? Then finally, you've got dependability. Can we actually count on each other to do high quality work on time? And then finally, and most importantly, and by a huge magnitude compared to these other factors, psychological safety. Can we take risks on this team without feeling insecure or embarrassed? Trust here is the foundation of what makes a great team and is critical to address. Otherwise, it is essentially a blocker to the other factors listed here. If you don't have psychological safety, then these other factors are very difficult to work on. In fact, in Google's research, psych safety had a far higher effect on performance than any other factor here. And when they set out to do this, they had some enormous, 100+ variables that they were looking into. And their assumptions around which would be the most important were really off. They were actually super wrong.
Yeah, I love, they stated at the front their assumptions of what they thought was going to be the highest factors, and they were like, oh, it's going to be, IQ, EQ, pay grade, socioeconomic background, all of these things. None of them featured in the top 5 here.
So why are we talking, why does actually take it, okay, we talked about psych safety and that enables us to take risks, but why does it even matter that we need to take risks? What are some examples of risk taking that might be important when working on a complex game with a tight schedule? Discuss in your groups for a few minutes. I'll say it again. What are some examples of risk taking that might be important when working on a complex game with a tight schedule? Yeah. And if you haven't already, what kind of risks might you take personally, on an individual basis, if you haven't had sort of talked about that yet? Alrighty. I think we all know the drill by now. Who wants to share? I'll go here first.
So something I brought up is like, say if you add a feature or something to a game and they're like, we've got to take it out. It's like you take that risk of, oh, okay. It's like they're going to remove it and you take that personally because you've like worked hard on it. But it's like, oh, if we keep that in the game, it might cause more problems for us later on kind of thing. So we talked about like having that open communication between teams to understand why they take a certain risk on something or why they're doing something is like really important so people don't take things personally to the best they can, I guess.
Yeah, I find even just asking why can rub people up the wrong way in some cases, right? For sure.
Yeah, just sort of like a little thing with our management and sort of like our client expectations. This is like a bit more of a sort of extenuating sort of circumstance, but it's like, okay, client throwing their weight around, like deadline used to be here, now it's here. And then sort of like some people on the sort of team stressing out. It's like, oh, we're going to have to put in extra time and work overtime or even like coming on the weekend. It's like, no one's asking you to do that. It's like if they want, it's like, yeah, trying to sort of like, you know, ride the sort of middle ground of like, okay, if the client wants this and management is wanting that as well, then it's like, well, the output is going to suffer. So it's like, well, yeah, if they want that, then it's like we have to be happy with getting the work done that we can get done with that time, and that means reduced quality. So, and just being sort of upfront and honest to management that, okay, yeah, we can do certain things. We can't sort of create content that is to the usual standard because you're not giving us time. So it's like, well, something's got to give, and this is what it is. So just being open and transparent on our end to management in terms of what we can get done with the time they're giving us. So.
Yeah. Yeah, conveying realistic expectations could potentially be, well, we can't do that, you know. Sure, anyone else? Yeah, that was sort of a maybe you could give it to me, I suppose.
A major part we touched upon was giving people like an understanding that they have space to fail and learn from those failings and talk about them with their team or their producers and what have you, because at the end of the day, that's like our best conditions to learn. But I think we said as you guys said, no plan goes smoothly ever as soon as you try to implement it. So is everything failing all the time, but no one talks about it and pretend it isn't, or actually talk about it and do it?
Yeah, the head in the sand approach. Yeah, so I suppose to link this back to what we were talking about before, at the beginning of the talk is we are inherently working with a lot of complex, chaotic problems that are going to arise all the time. And we need teams that are able to speak up when something isn't going according to plan, because it inevitably will. Examples like, speaking up about an interpersonal conflict that is slowing the team down. Even just putting forward a creative idea to make the game fun could be hard for someone to do if it's not a psychologically safe environment. Asking for help and saying you don't know how to do something is difficult when it's not a psychologically safe environment. Even giving an estimate on work, if you know that that's not going to fit the original plan, that in itself could be quite scary to do if it's not a psychologically safe environment. So it's pretty clear why this is such an important thing to get right. And when we teach this in courses, we kind of talk about it as it's the cement on the ground. It's the foundation. If you don't have this, then all the rest of the other stuff we've been talking about is extremely difficult to do because people are in a state of fear and they're afraid of speaking up about something. And we need people to speak up about pretty much everything.
And we talked at the start about how this sort of approach is empirical. It's based on what's really happening in the real world. And we need the people to be able to tell us when they see something in the real world. Has anyone heard of the example of the Symbian OS from Nokia? So the management, everybody upstairs all thought everything was fantastic, and as things were changing in the mobile phone industry, they could adapt and keep pace, bring out new features, new cameras and blah, blah, blah. What no one was telling them, because they felt they had no safety to talk about, was that all the engineering people knew that the Symbian OS took 2 weeks to compile. 2 weeks to make a new build. Can you imagine what their tech stack must have looked like? And so management come along and we need a new feature. How long will that take? And that was one of the things that contributed to Nokia being nowhere in the market today. But no one was telling them because they just didn't have the safety. No one could bring it up, and so they didn't know.
And has anyone here heard of the whole Spotify model, squads and tribes and chapters and all that sort of stuff? Put your hand if you've heard about it. I've heard a lot about it, obviously. I've seen it spread like wildfire out in the industry. But when I worked there, I think what made them look so good as a poster child for Agile, and from being there, really feeling it on the inside, and what made all of these really empowered teams, Agile ways of working stuff work so well, was that many times I saw the CEO of the company get up on stage in front of thousands of employees and say, I want Spotify to make more mistakes than any other company in the world. Oh, and by the way, here's one that I made recently and here's what I learned from it. To me, embodying this stuff is just so important, and it kind of has to come from leadership too. So diving into this a little bit deeper, what does this actually look like? It means that we're able to give and receive feedback. Anyone here really good at giving and receiving feedback? Oh, all right. Awesome. Love it. Usually that's kind of a joke and no one puts their hand up. So well done to you. It's not easy to do. Being able to ask difficult questions, as we've been talking about, raising issues and concerns, asking for help, disagreeing. I'm sure that happens a lot when we're trying to figure out if a game's fun or not. Offering solutions, asking for clarifications, and importantly, admitting problems and errors. So you might be wondering, okay, well, that all sounds good, but how do we actually do this? How do we create an environment? First and foremost, as I mentioned before, leadership have to model this. They have to be able to say that they don't know everything. They have to be able to say that they made a mistake and here's what I learned from it. Modeling this behavior is insanely important. But there's other things you can do. You can practice it. And I know that sounds kind of weird, yeah, and it kind of is. But I used to run lots of feedback workshops when I was a coach at Spotify, and we would get people to practice giving each other feedback. And I can guarantee you the more you do it, the easier it becomes. And sometimes a good place to start is just to practice it, to not even give very real feedback yet, and just try what it's like to apply some sort of framework or approach. Obviously, an easy one is you can just allow these things to happen and not, chastise people for doing these things. But then also you can facilitate it. You can create meetings where you bring up stuff. You actually encourage dissent. You encourage surfacing of problems. And create opportunities for this to happen in a safe way.
Yeah, and ask for feedback. Seek it out.
Yep. So we promised that this would be somewhat, you might have something to take away. So here's something you can try. This is my favorite activity to run with teams. I do it every time I kick off a team, and it's called Journey Lines. So has anyone here watched any videos or read anything from Brené Brown? She's nice. Fantastic. Kind of a big deal when it comes to vulnerability, shame, trust, these topics. And the quickest path to psychological safety is vulnerability. So then how do we create an environment where we're being vulnerable with one another? This is an exercise you can try. It's called Journey Lines. And basically all you're doing is you're drawing a graph of the highs and lows of your life. If you're in a really psychologically unsafe environment, a place you can start is talking about the highs and lows of your career rather than personal stuff. If you've got a pretty good vibe going and people all get along pretty well, then you can take it to the next level and talk about, I've had ones where people have talked about almost losing their children and all sorts of just crazy stuff. Here's when I got divorced and this was a really low point in my life. I'll let you decide how much you want to dial that up and down.
Yeah, read the room.
Read the room. But the nice part about this activity, and you can Google it, is it really, you get some really beneficial stuff like, I worked at this company, I worked on this game, I learnt these things, and you get some really valuable information about your colleagues that you might not have known before. You get to learn what they like and what makes them tick. But you also learn what's been hard for them and what's been challenging. And, you might have stories like your crunch story where you're like, I had to work for 24 hours and that was really tough and almost broke me. I almost felt like leaving the company. Having people that maybe you admire and respect make statements like that creates an enormous amount of trust for them because you feel like they're not invulnerable. You feel like they've got, they're not hiding something, because they're kind of putting it on the table, and that creates trust. And trust allows for these difficult conversations and to really foster psychological safety because you're able to talk about the difficult things. Speaking of Brené Brown, one of my favorite quotes from her is, vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. So if you think about, we're trying to find the fun, we're trying to create a game that's fun. That is a very creative, innovative process. We're going to have to try dumb ideas, right? We're going to have to throw stuff against the wall that's not going to work. And in order to get there, that takes being vulnerable, putting forward those ideas, and sometimes they will work really well. Another fun, Spotify story is anyone ever used Discover Weekly? Yeah. That came about from a team trying something new and the CEO and founder of the company thinking it was a dumb idea. So they presented it to him and he said, I don't like this. I don't really believe in it. But he had to stand true to the thing that he got up on stage saying all the time, which is, I want this company to make lots of mistakes. So rather than shooting it down and saying, well, no, we're not doing that, all right, bring me the data, try it out. I don't believe in it. And it became one of the most successful features that the company has ever done and paved the way for huge investments into machine learning and other types of recommendations-based features in the company as a result of the CEO thinking it was a dumb idea. So if ever there's a fantastic example of this working in practice.
And it makes perfect sense when you think about it, because if you're ever in an environment where you have to do lots of ass covering and being worried and careful and all that sort of stuff, think about how much mental energy you're putting into that stuff, that if you didn't have to do that, you could put all of that into doing the work.
Yeah, cool. So once we get that foundation in place, then we need to then ask ourselves, where is my team along this journey towards high performance? Because when we set up a new team, they don't just work really well immediately. Has anyone ever seen that happen before? It's usually quite clunky because we get into this forming phase and we're like, yeah, we're going to change the world, everything's going to be great. And then we end up in this storming phase where we go, oh, but you had that idea of it's great, but that's different to my idea of great. And I thought we were going to work like this, but you said we were going to work like we just sort of like bump into each other a whole bunch, and we have to figure out, we have to create norms, right? Which is why the next stage is called norming. Anyone here in forming phase right now? You're just getting together as a new team? Okay, one. What about storming, where we're clunky and running into each other and we're still trying to figure out how we do things? Anyone in that phase?
Bit of personality clashes, maybe.
A few, yeah. Norming, kind of in a team, we know how we work. Things are pretty good, yeah. What about performing? Really
high-performing
kick-ass team. Wow.
Look at that.
Liars.
Harsh, dude.
No, I find that state is really hard to get to. Where
and even harder to stay there.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to get there; it's another thing to stay there, because things change all the time, right? So this is just another framework. It's by who does this?
Tuckman.
Tuckman, that's right. Tuckman's model for stages of team development. And it's a worthwhile thing to ask yourselves, where are you? Because there are strategies for how to get to the next stage.
This is really useful if you join a new team, or if you're helping a team. You can look at where they're at, the sort of problems they might be facing, what you can do to help them get to the next stage more smoothly. It's really awesome.
Another thing you can take away with you is a team kickoff. So if you do need to create a whole bunch of norms and get through that storming phase as quickly as possible, I like to create kickoffs that more or less address these three areas. So I was talking before about psych safety. Journey lines is a great one to kind of create that vulnerable space as quickly as possible so that you can have other conversations about how we're going to work together. But then if you look at Google's other list, dependability, structure and clarity, meaning, impact, I find that a day or two kickoff together with team building activities around these different topics can be really helpful to get people through that storming phase into norming as quickly as possible. So Darryl talked before about creating a vision for the game that you're creating. That's a really worthwhile activity that can help bring people together around the why and the purpose. It just so happens that purpose is also one of our intrinsic motivations as humans, so really important thing to get right. There you might talk about goals, you might come up with a high-level plan, like a release plan, to the different stages of development, depending on whether you're more of a live ops game or sort of a ship it and it's done style game. And then you've got the people side of things. So I have a workshop that I like to run called a role expectations workshop, where we basically talk about each role that exists in the team and what does the rest of the team expect of that person in that role, and what does the person in that role expect of themselves, and then we compare. So you kind of do it in an unbiased way where you kind of go 3, 2, 1 and everyone shows what their expectations are, and you can see whether you're aligned or not aligned, because often really big challenges can come as a result of people thinking you're supposed to do one thing and you think you're supposed to do something else, and then they kind of butt heads. Has anyone done a team working agreement before?
Or sometimes called a social charter or a team norms.
Yeah, they're quite helpful to aligning on what we as individuals want everyone else to kind of agree to in a team. And then finally, the process piece, crikey, around structure and clarity. So, how are we going to work? Are we doing Scrum, or are we doing Kanban? How often do we meet? Why do we meet? How do we like to work? Is that conducive to what we're trying to achieve for our vision and our plan? Yeah, so I think these are, I call them the 3 Ps: people, purpose, product. Sorry, people, purpose, process. And that's also one way you can structure a team kickoff.
Give it a try if you haven't.
Because we want to avoid this. Yeah. All right, so wrapping up. We've talked about how to use adaptive release plans in order to effectively manage risk. We've talked a bit about psych safety, team cohesion, and how do we create an environment where people are going to be honest about where they are and where the team's at. Summary. Game development is complex and it requires an emergent approach. Darryl.
So we've gone through the 3 patterns and their associated anti-patterns for successfully planning, launching and maintaining games. A shared vision to bring everyone together into that alignment so that we're all on that same page. We all know how what we're doing contributes to the overall success of the game. Being willing to face into those hard trade-off decisions and stick to it in order to balance, the scope and meeting dates and giving ourselves enough time to get through all of those phases, and empowerment and autonomy, giving the team the reins, letting them make the decisions that they're probably best placed to make anyway, shift the authority to where the information is and let them use it well.
Yeah, and this notion that psych safety isn't just this buzzword, nice to have thing. It is absolutely required for teams to work well. And if you want to work in this way that is emergent, that is about facing problems head on, discussing them and finding alternate pathways, you absolutely need it. It is foundational.
It's the single most defining factor in high-performing teams.
And then finally, once you've got that in place, teams really need shared understanding of, like I said, those 3 Ps. As I mentioned in the beginning, this is little snippets of a bigger course that we're running at the end of the month in October 30th. Darryl and I's background, whilst we've got a little bit of work we've done with the games industry, we haven't been living and breathing it like you have. So what we've done is we've partnered with people that are quite experienced producers to learn from them and instill and weave their knowledge and experience into our background, which is.
And we've given them the option of owning and co-creating one of each of the modules of our course with us. So we've got 4 modules, each one of which we've got one of these module co-creators working with us on to make it as real and relevant and based with real experience.
Yeah, so Playside are working with us on day 1 on the sort of foundational side of game producing and the industry. On day 2, we're working with a woman by the name of Ali McLean Hennessy. She has worked on stuff like Warhammer 40k, worked with Wargaming, Mighty Kingdom, and now League of Geeks. I like to call her the Kanban Queen.
Yeah, she likes that title too.
And on day 3, we're going all into the real nitty-gritty of the kind of project management side of making games. There we're working with Morgan Jaffett, who's been around since 1998, which...
time of the dinosaurs.
I was just starting high school then.
Jesus.
It's a baby. Thanks, old man. So we're going to be working with him on that. And then Dylan Miklaszek, who used to be on the IGEA board and was GM and Managing Director of Gameloft, on the last part, which is all about leading people and the leadership skills needed to really succeed in this role. Just a little plug for that. If you are an IGA member, you get 20% off. If you're not, feel free to reach out to us and maybe we can hook you up with something else.
Yeah, if you came to this talk, we'd help you out.
Yeah.
We've also hoped to just share with you some of the stuff that we've learned working with these people along the path of creating this course. So hopefully some of the things that we've been through today have been interesting and relevant for you. And yeah, we would love it if you know anyone that you think could benefit from this course, or if you're interested yourself, then by all means look us up. We'd love to have you.
And we've got a really diverse group of people that have signed up already. We've got people from everything from EA to tiny little indie studios. So
yeah, and everyone from producers to QA people and so on. So it should be a good group.
Thanks so much for being with us today. And how are we doing for time?
Yeah.
A few minutes left. If you've got questions for us, feel free to hang around. We'd love to help answer any you have, whether it's about what we've covered today or the course or anything. I'm just happy to meet you too. And thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of GCAP. Thanks.